Okay, well, we'll start with the book reading. Okay. The Three Languages. An aged count once lived in Switzerland who had only a son, but he was stupid and could learn nothing. Then said the father, "Listen, my son, I can get nothing into your head. Let me try as I will. You must go from here, and I will give you into the care of a celebrated master who shall see what he can do with you." The youth was sent into a strange town and remained a whole year with the master. At the end of this time, he came home again, and his father asked, "Now, my son, what have you learnt?" "Father, I have learnt what the dogs say when they bark." "Lord, have mercy on us," cried the father. "Is that all you have learnt? I will send you into another town to another master." The youth was taken there and stayed a year with his master likewise. When he came back, the father again asked, "My son, what have you learnt?" He answered, "Father, I have learnt what the birds say." Then the father fell into a rage and said, "Oh, you lost man! You have spent precious time and learnt nothing. Are you not ashamed to appear before my eyes? I will send you to a third master, and if you learn nothing this time also, I will no longer be your father." The youth remained a whole year with the third master also, and when he came home again, and his father inquired, "My son, what have you learnt?" He answered, "Dear father, I have learnt what the frogs croak." Yeah, why do I trip over the frogsies? Okay, then the father fell into the most furious anger, sprang up, called his people over and said, "This man is no longer my son. I cast him out and command you to take him out into the forest and kill him." They took him there, but when they should have killed him, they could not do it for pity and let him go. And they cut the eyes and the tongue out of a deer that they might carry them to the old man as a token. The youth wandered on, and after some time came to a fortress where he begged for a night's lodging. "Yes," said the lord of the castle, "if you will pass the night down there in the old tower, go there, but I warn you, it is at the peril of your life, for it is full of wild dogs, which bark and howl without stopping, and at certain hours a man has to be given to them, whom they at once devour." The whole district was in sorrow and dismay because of them, and yet no one could do anything to stop this. The youth, however, was without fear and said, "Just let me go down to the barking dogs and give me something that I can throw to them. They will do nothing to harm me." Since he himself insisted, they gave him some food for the wild animals, and led him down to the tower. When he went inside, the dogs did not bark at him, but wagged their tails quite amicably around him, ate what he set before them, and did not hurt one hair on his head. The next morning, to the astonishment of everyone, he came out again safe and unharmed, and said to the lord of the castle, "The dogs have revealed to me in their own language why they dwell there and bring evil on the land. They are bewitched and are obliged to watch over a great treasure which is below the tower, and they can have no rest until it is taken away. And I have likewise learnt from their discourse how that is to be done." Then all who heard this rejoiced, and the lord of the castle said he would adopt him as a son if he accomplished it successfully. He went down again, and as he knew what he had to do, he did it thoroughly, and brought a chest full of gold out with him. The howling of the wild dogs was heard no more. They had disappeared, and the country was freed from the trouble. After some time, he took it into his head that he would travel to Rome. On the way, he passed by a marsh in which a number of frogs were sitting croaking. He listened to them, and when he became aware of what they were saying, he grew very thoughtful and sad. At last he arrived in Rome, where the Pope had just died, and there was great difficulty as to whom they should appoint as his successor. They at length agreed that the person chosen as Pope should be distinguished by some divine and miraculous token. And just as that was decided on, the young Count entered into the church, and suddenly 2 snow-white doves flew on his shoulders and remained sitting there. The ecclesiastics recognized that as a token from above, and asked him on the spot if he would be Pope. He was undecided, and knew not if he was worthy of this. But the doves counselled him to do it, and at length he said yes. Then he was anointed and consecrated, and thus was fulfilled the prophecy he had heard from the frogs on his way, which had so disturbed him that he was to be His Holiness the Pope. Then he had to sing a mass, and did not know one word of it, but the 2 doves sat continually on his shoulders and said it all in his ear. That was the end of the story. That was very strange, very short. The poor man. Okay, so the next story that we're going to read is called Clever Elsie. There was once a man who had a daughter who was called Clever Elsie, and when she had grown up, her father said, "We will get her married." Okay. "Yes," said the mother. "If only anyone who would come If only anyone would come who would have her." At length the man came from a distance and wooed her, who was called Hans. Oh, not Hans. But he stipulated that Clever Elsie should be really wise. "Oh," said the father, "she's sharp enough." And the mother said, "Oh, she can see the wind coming up the street and hear the flies coughing." "Well," said Hans, "if she's not really wise, I won't have her." When they were sitting at dinner and had eaten, the mother said, "Elsie, go into the cellar and fetch some beer." Then Clever Elsie took the pitcher from the wall, went into the cellar, and clapped the lid up and down as she went, to pass the time. When she was below, she fetched herself a chair and set it before the barrel so that she had no need to stoop, and did not hurt her back or do herself any unexpected injury. Then she placed the can before her and turned the tap, and while the beer was running, she would not let her eyes be idle, but looked up at the wall, and after much peering here and there, saw a pickaxe exactly above her, which the masons had accidentally left there. Then Clever Elsie began to weep, and said, "If I get Hans, and we have a child, and he grows big, and we send him into the cellar here to draw beer, then the pickaxe will fall on his head and kill him." Then she sat and wept and screamed with all the strength of her body over the misfortune which lay before her. What a specific problem! Those upstairs waited for the drink, but Clever Elsie still did not come. Then the woman who said to the servant, "Just go down into the cellar and see where Elsie is." The maid went and found her sitting in front of the barrel, screaming loudly. "Elsie, why do you weep?" asked the maid. "Ah," she answered, "have I not reason to weep? If I get Hans and we have a child and he grows big, he has to draw beer here, and the pickaxe will perhaps fall on his head and kill him." Then said the maid, "What a clever Elsie we have," and sat down beside her and began to loudly weep over the misfortune. Okay, both crying over a theoretical situation. After a while, as the maid did not come back, those upstairs were thirsty for the beer. The man said to the boy, "Just go down into the cellar and see where Elsie and the girl are." The boy went down and sat, and there sat Clever Elsie and the girl both weeping together. Then he asked, "Why are you weeping?" "Ah," said Elsie, "have I not reason to weep? If I get Hans and we have a child and he grows big, he has to draw beer here, and the pickaxe will fall on his head and kill him." Then said the boy, "What a clever Elsie we have!" Sat down by her and likewise began to howl loudly. Upstairs they waited for the boy, but as still he did not return, the man said to the woman, "Just go down into the cellar and see where Elsie is." The woman went down and found all three in the midst of their lamentations, and inquired what was the cause. Then Elsie told her that her future child was likely to be killed by the pickaxe when it grew big and had to draw beer. And the pickaxe fell down. Then said the mother likewise, "What a clever Elsie we have," and sat down and wept with them. It's a crying party. The man upstairs waited a short time, but as his wife did not come back and his thirst grew even greater, he said, "I must go into the cellar myself and see where Elsie is." But when he got into the cellar, and they were all sitting together crying, and he heard the reason, and that Elsie's child was the cause, and that Elsie might perhaps bring one into the world some day, that it might be killed by the pickaxe, if it should happen to be sitting beneath it, drawing beer just at the very time of when it fell down, he cried, "Oh, what a clever Elsie!" and sat down and likewise wept with them. The bridegroom stayed upstairs alone for a long time, but as no one would come back, he thought, "They must be waiting for me below. I too must go there and see what they are about." When he got down, 5 of them were sitting, screaming and lamenting quite piteously, each outdoing the other. "What misfortune has happened then?" he asked. "Ah, dear Hans," said Elsie, "if we marry each other and have a child, and he is big, and perhaps send him here to draw something to drink, then the pickaxe which has been left up there might dash his brains out if it were to fall down. So have we not reason to weep?" "Come," said Hans, "more understanding than that is not needed for my household. As you are such a clever Elsie, I will have you." And he seized her hand, took her upstairs with him, and married her. After Hans had some time with her, he said, "Wife, I am going out to work and earn some money for us. Go into the field and cut the corn that we may have some bread." "Yes, dear Hans, I will do that." After Hans had gone away, she cooked herself some good broth and took it into the field with her. When she came to the field, she said to herself, "What shall I do? Shall I shear first, or shall I eat first? Oh, I will eat first." Then she emptied her basin of broth, and when she was fully satisfied, she once more said, "What shall I do? Shall I shear first, or shall I sleep first? I will sleep first." Then she lay down among the corn and fell asleep. Hans had been at home for a long time, but Elsie did not come. Then said he, "What a clever Elsie I have! She is so industrious that she does not even come home to eat." As evening came, however, she still stayed away, and Hans went out to see what she had cut, but nothing was cut, and she was lying among the corn asleep. Then Hans hastened home and brought a fowler's net with little bells and hung it round about her, and she still went on sleeping. Then he ran home, shut the door, and sat down in his chair and worked. At length, when it was quite dark, clever Elsie awoke, and when she got up there was a jingling all round about her, and the bells rang at each step which she took. Then she was alarmed, and became uncertain whether she really was clever Elsie or not, and said, "Is it I, or is it not I?" But she did not know the answer to this, and stood for a time in doubt. At length, and thought, "I will go home and ask if it is me or not. They will be sure to know." She ran to the door of her own house, but it was shut. Then she knocked at the window and cried, "Hans, is Elsie inside?" "Yes," answered Hans, "she is inside." At that she was terrified, and said, "Ah, heavens, then it is not I," and went to another door. But when the people heard of the jingling of the bells, they would not open it, and she could get in nowhere. Then she ran out to the village, and no one has seen her since. That is quite the ending. So she didn't even know who she was, just because someone put a bunch of bells around her neck. That's crazy. That is such a weird story. Oh my. Okay, the tailor in heaven. One very fine day, it came to pass that the good God wished to enjoy himself in the heavenly garden, and took all the apostles and saints with him, so that no one stayed in heaven but Saint Peter. The Lord had commanded him to let no one in during his absence, so Peter stood by the door and kept watch. Before long, someone knocked. Peter asked who was there and what he wanted. "I am a poor, honest tailor who prays for admission," replied a smooth voice. "Honest indeed," said Peter, "like the thief on the gallows. You have been light-fingered and have stolen snippets of folks' clothes. You will not get into heaven. The Lord has forbidden me to let anyone in while he is out." "Come, do be merciful," cried the tailor. "Little scraps which fall off the table of their own accord are not stolen, and are not worth speaking about. Look, I am lame and have blisters on my feet from walking here. I cannot possibly turn back again. Let me in, and I will do all the rough work. I will carry the children and wash their clothes, and wash and clean the benches on which they have been playing, and patch all their torn clothes." Saint Peter let himself be moved by pity, and opened the door of heaven just wide enough for the lame tailor to slip his lean body in. He was forced to sit in a corner behind the door, and was to stay quietly and peaceably there, in order that the Lord, when he returned, might not observe him and be angry. The tailor obeyed, but once St. Peter went outside the door, he got up and, full of curiosity, went round about into every corner of heaven and inspected the arrangement of every place. At length he came to a spot where many beautiful and delightful chairs were standing, and in the middle was a seat of all gold, which was shining with jewels. It was much higher than the other chairs, and a footstool of gold was before it. It was, however, the seat on which the Lord sat when he was at home, and from which he could see everything which happened on earth. The tailor stood still and looked at the seat for a long time, for it pleased him better than all else. At last he could master his curiosity no longer, and climbed up and seated himself in the chair. Then he saw everything which was happening on earth, and observed an ugly old woman who was washing clothes by the side of the stream, secretly laying 2 veils on the side for herself. The sight of this made the tailor so angry that he laid hold of the golden footstool and threw it down to earth through heaven at the old thief. Since, however, he could not bring the stool back again, he slipped quietly out of the chair, seated himself in his place behind the door, and behaved as if he had never stirred from the spot. When the Lord and Master came back again with his heavenly companions, he did not see the tailor behind the door, but when he seated himself on his chair, the footstool was missing. He asked St. Peter what had become of the stool, but he did not know. Then he asked if he had let anyone in. "I know of no one who has been here," answered Peter, "but a lame tailor who is still sitting behind the door." Then the Lord had the tailor brought before him, and asked him if he had taken away the stool, and where he had put it. "O Lord," answered the tailor joyously, "I threw it in my anger down to the earth at an old woman whom I saw stealing 2 veils while washing." "Oh, you knave," said the Lord, "were I to judge as you judge, how do you think you could have escaped judgment so long? I should have no chairs, benches, seats, nay, not even fire tongs, for I would have thrown everything down at the sinners long ago. Now you can stay no longer in heaven, but must go outside the door again. Then go where you will. No one shall give punishment here, but I alone, the Lord." St. Peter was obliged to take the tailor out of heaven again, and as he had torn shoes and feet covered with blisters, he took a stick in his hand and went to wait a bit where the good soldiers sit and make merry. That was the end of the story. These past stories have been really, really strange. Okay, the wishing table, the gold ass, and the cudgel in the sack. There was once upon a time a tailor who had 3 sons and only 1 goat. But as the goat supported the whole of them with her milk, she was obliged to have good food, and to be taken every day to pasture. The sons, therefore, did this in turn. Once the eldest took her to the churchyard where the finest herbs were to be found, and let her eat and run about there. At night, when it was time to go, he asked, "Goat, have you had enough?" The goat answered, "I have eaten so much, not a leaf more I'll touch." Oh, what did they do a goat sound? Meh. Come home then, said the youth, and took hold of the cord round her neck, led her into the stable, and tied her up securely. Well, said the old tailor, has the goat had as much food as she should? Oh, answered the son, she has eaten so much, not a leaf more she'll touch. But the father wished to see for himself, and went down to the stable, stroked the dear animal, and asked, Goat, are you satisfied? The goat answered, Why should I be satisfied? Among the graves I leapt about, and found no food, so went without. Meh! What do I hear? Cried the tailor, and ran upstairs and said to the youth, You liar, you said the goat had enough, and let her have hunger. And in his anger he took a yard measure from the wall, and drove him out with blows. Next day it was the turn of the second son, who looked out for a place along the garden hedge, where nothing but good herbs grew, and the goat cleared them all off. At night, when he wanted to go home, he asked, Goat, are you satisfied? The goat answered, I have eaten so much, not a leaf more I'll touch. Come home then, said the youth, and led her home, and tied her up in the stable. Well, said the old tailor, has the goat had as much food as she should? Oh, answered the son, she has eaten so much, not a leaf more she'll touch. The tailor would not rely on this, and he went down to the stable and said, Goat, have you had enough? The goat answered, Why should I be satisfied? Among the graves I leapt about, and found no food, so went without. Meh! The godless wretch, cried the tailor, to let such a good animal hunger. And he ran up and drove the youth outside with the yard measure. Now came the turn of the third son, who wanted to do the thing well, and sought out some bushes with the finest leaves, and let the goat devour them. In the evening, when he wanted to go home, he asked, Goat, have you had enough? The goat answered, I have eaten so much, not a leaf more I'll touch. Come home then, said the youth, and led her into the stable, and tied her up. Well, said the old tailor, has the goat had a proper amount of food? She has eaten so much, and not a leaf more she'll touch. The tailor did not trust that, and went down and asked the goat, Have you had enough? The wicked beast answered, Why should I be satisfied? Among the graves I leapt about, and found no leaves, so went without. Oh, the brood of liars, cried the tailor, each as wicked and forgetful as his duty as the other. You shall no longer make a fool of me. And quite beside himself with anger, he ran upstairs, and is it beloved? What's that? The poor young fellow so vigorously with the yard measure that he sprang out of the house. The old tailor was now alone with his goat. The next morning he went down into the stable, caressed the goat, and said, Come, my dear little animal, I will take you to feed myself. He took her by the rope and led her to the green hedges, and amongst the milfoil and whatever goats like to eat. There you may for once eat to your heart's content, he said to her, and let her browse till evening. Then he asked, Goat, are you satisfied? And she replied, I have eaten so much, not a leaf more I'll touch. Come home then, said the tailor, and led her to the stable, and tied her fast. When he was going away, he turned round again and said, Are you satisfied for once? But the goat did not behave the better to him, and cried, Why should I be satisfied? Among the graves I leapt about, and found no leaves, so went without. When the tailor heard that, he was shocked, and saw clearly that he had driven away his 3 sons without cause. Wait, you ungrateful creature, cried he. It is not enough to throw you out. I will mark you so that you will no more dare to show yourself amongst honest tailors. In great haste he ran upstairs, What? Fetched his razor, lathered the goat's head, and shaved her as clean as the palm of his hand. And as the yard measure, which would have been too good for her, he brought the horsewhip, and he gave her such cuts with it that she ran away in violent haste. When the tailor was thus left quite alone in his house, he fell into great grief, and would gladly have his sons back again, but no one knew where they had gone. The eldest had apprenticed himself to a carpenter, and learnt industriously, and when the time came for him to go travelling, his master presented him with a little table which had no particular appearance, and was made of common wood. But it had one good property. If anyone set it out, and said, "Little table, set yourself," the good little table was at once covered with a clean little cloth, and a plate was there, and a knife and fork beside it, and dishes with boiled meats and roasted meats, as many as there was room for, and a great glass of red wine shone that it made the heart glad. That is making me so hungry. The young journeyman thought, "With this you have enough for your whole life," and went joyously about the world, and never troubled himself at all whether an inn was good or bad, or if anything was to be found in it or not. When it suited him, he did not enter it in at all, but either on the plain, in a wood, a meadow, or wherever he fancied, he took his little table off his back, set it down before him, and said, "Set yourself," and then everything appeared that his heart desired. At length he took it into his head to go back to his father, whose anger would now be appeased, and who would now willingly receive him with his wishing table. It came to pass that on his way home one evening, he came to an inn which was filled with guests. They bade him welcome, and invited him to sit and eat with them, for otherwise he would have difficulty in getting anything. "No," answered the carpenter, "I will not take the few bites out of your mouths. Rather than that, you shall be my guests." They laughed and thought he was jesting with them. He, however, placed his wooden table in the middle of the room, and said, "Little table, set yourself." Instantly it was covered with food, so good that the host could never have procured it, and the smell of it ascended pleasantly to the nostrils of the guests. "Go ahead, dear friends," said the carpenter, and when the guests saw that he meant it, did not need to be asked twice, and drew near, pulled out their knives and attacked it valiantly. And what surprised them the most was that the dish became empty, and a full one instantly took its place of its own accord. The innkeeper stood in one corner and watched the affair, and he did not know at all what to say, but thought, "You could easily find a use for such a cook as that in your kitchen." The carpenter and his comrades made merry until late into the night, and at length they lay down to sleep, and the young apprentice also went to bed and set his magic table against the wall. The host's thoughts, however, let him have no rest, and it occurred to him that there was a little old table in the storeroom which looked like the apprentice's, and he brought it out quite softly and exchanged it for the wishing table. The next morning the carpenter paid for his bed, took up his table, never thinking that he got a false one, and went his way. At midday he reached his father, who received them with great joy. "Well, my dear son, what have you learnt?" said he. "Father, I have become a carpenter." "A good trade," replied the old man, "but what have you brought back with you from your apprenticeship?" "Father, the best thing which I have brought back with me is this little table." The tailor inspected it on all sides and said, "You did not make a masterpiece when you made that. It is a bad old table." "But it is a table that furnishes itself," replied the son. "When I set it out and tell it to colour itself, the most beautiful dishes stand on it, and a wine also which gladdens the heart. Just invite all our relations and friends, they shall refresh and enjoy themselves for once, for the table will give them all that they require." This is not good. When the company was assembled, he put his table in the middle of the room and said, "Little table, set yourself." But the little table did not stir itself, and remained just as bare as any other table, which did not understand language. Then the poor apprentice became aware that his table had been changed, and was ashamed at having to stand there like a liar. The relations, however, mocked him, and were forced to go home without having eaten or drunk. The father brought out his patches again and went on tailoring, but the son went to work with the master in the craft. The second son had gone to a miller and apprenticed himself to him. When his years were over, the master said, "As you have conducted yourself so well, I give you a donkey of a peculiar kind, which neither draws a cart nor carries a sack." "What use is he, then?" asked the young apprentice. "He lets gold drop from his mouth," answered the miller. "If you set him on a cloth and say, 'Bricklebrit,' the good animal will drop gold pieces for you." "That is a fine thing," said the apprentice, and thanked the master and went out into the world. When he had need of gold, he had only to say "Bricklebrit" to the donkey, and it rained gold pieces, and he had nothing to do but pick them off the ground. Wherever he went, the best of everything was good enough for him, and the dearer the better, for he always had a full purse. And when he had looked about the world for some time, he thought, "You must seek out your father. If you go to him with the gold, he will forget his anger and receive you well." It came to pass that he came to the same inn where his brother's table had been exchanged. He led his donkey by the bridle, and as the host was about to take the animal from him and tie him up, the young apprentice said, "Don't trouble yourself. I will take my grey horse into the stable and tie him up myself too, for I must know where he stands." This struck the host as odd, and he thought that a man who was forced to look after his donkey himself could not have much to spend. But when the stranger put his hand in his pocket and brought out 2 gold pieces, and said he was to buy something good for him, the host opened his eyes wide, and ran and sought out the best fare that he could muster. After dinner, the guest asked what he owed. The host did not see why he should not double the reckoning, and said the apprentice must give 2 more gold pieces. Oh, he's very greedy. He felt in his pocket, but his gold was just at an end. "Wait an instant, sir host," said he. "I will go and fetch some money." But he took the tablecloth with him. The host could not imagine what this could mean, and being curious, stole after him, and as the guest bolted the stable door, he peeped through a hole left by a knot in the wood. The stranger spread out the cloth under the animal and cried, "Bricklebrit," and immediately the beast began to let gold pieces fall, so that it fairly rained down money on the ground. "My word," said the host. "Is it ducats are quickly coined there? A purse like that can't be wrong." The guest paid his score, went to bed, but in the night the host stole down into the stable, led away the master of the mint, and tied up another donkey in its place. Early next morning the apprentice travelled away with his donkey, and thought that he had his gold donkey. At midday he reached his father, who rejoiced to see him again, and gladly took him in. "What have you made yourself, my son?" asked the old man. "A miller, dear father," he answered. "What have you brought back with you from your travels?" "Nothing else but a donkey." "There are enough donkeys here," said the father. "I would rather have a good goat." "Yes," replied the son, "but it is no common donkey, but a gold one, and when I say Bricklebrit, the good beast opens its mouth and drops a whole sheetful of gold pieces. Just summon all our relations, and I will make them rich folks." "That suits me well," said the tailor, "for then I shall have no need to torment myself any longer with the needle." And he ran out himself and called the relations together. As soon as they were assembled, the miller bade them make way, spread out his cloth, and brought the donkey into the room. "Now watch," said he, and cried "Bricklebrit," but no gold pieces fell, and it was clear that the animal knew nothing of the art, for every donkey did not attain such perfection. Then the poor miller made a frown, saw that he was betrayed, and begged pardon of the relatives, who went home as poor as they came. There was no help for it, and the old man had to take his needle once more, and the youth hired himself to a miller. The third brother, who had apprenticed himself to a turner, and as creating by lathe is skilled labour, He was the longest in learning. His brothers, however, told him in a letter how badly things had gone with them, and how the innkeeper had cheated them of their beautiful wishing gifts on the last evening before they reached home. When the turner had served his time and had set out on his travels, as he has conducted himself so well, his master presented him with a sack and said, "There is a cudgel in it." "What's a cudgel?" "I can put it on the sack," said he, "and it may be of good service to me, but why should the cudgel be in it? It only makes it heavy." "I will tell you why," replied the master. "If anyone has done anything to injure you, do but say, 'Out of the sack, cudgel,' and the cudgel will leap forth among the people and play such a dance on their backs that they will not be able to stir or move for a week, and it will not leave off until you say, 'Into the sack, cudgel.'" The apprentice thanked him and put the sack on his back, and when anyone came too near him and wished to attack him, he said, "Out of the sack, cudgel," and instantly the cudgel sprang out and beat the coat or jacket of one after the other right on their backs, and never stopped until it had stripped off them, and it was done so quickly that before anyone was aware, it was already his own turn. In the evening, the young turner reached the inn where his brothers had been cheated. He laid his sack on the table before him and began to talk of all the wonderful things which he had seen in the world. "Yes," said he, "people may easily find a table which will cover itself, a gold donkey, and things of that kind, extremely good things, which I by no means despise, but these are nothing in comparison with the treasure which I have won for myself, and am carrying about with me in my sack there." The innkeeper pricked up his ears. "What in the world can that be?" thought he. "The sack must be filled with nothing but jewels. I ought to get them cheap too, for all good things go in threes." When it was time to sleep, the guest stretched himself on the bench and laid his sack beneath him for a pillow. When the innkeeper thought that his guest was lying in sound sleep, he went to him and pushed and pulled quite gently and carefully at the sack to see if he could possibly draw it away and lay another in its place. The turner had, however, been waiting for this for a long time, and now, just as the innkeeper was about to give a hearty tug, he cried, "Out of the sack, cudgel!" Instantly the little cudgel came forth and fell on the innkeeper and gave him a sound thrashing. The host cried for mercy, but the louder he cried, so much more heavily the cudgel beat the time on his back, until at length he fell to the ground exhausted. Then the turner said, "If you do not give back the table which cover itself, and the gold donkey, the dance shall begin afresh." "Oh no," cried the host quite humbly, "I will gladly produce everything, only make the accursed goblin creep back into the sack." "Then," said the apprentice, "I will let mercy take the place of justice, but beware of getting into mischief again." So he cried, "Into the sack, cudgel, and let him have rest." The next morning the turner went home to his father with the wishing table and the gold donkey. The tailor rejoiced when he saw him once more, and asked him likewise what he had learned in the foreign parts. "Dear father," said he, "I have become a turner." "A skilled trade," said the father. "What have you brought back with you from your travels?" "A precious thing, dear father," cried the son, "a cudgel in the sack." "What?" cried the father. "A cudgel? That's worth your trouble indeed. From every tree you can cut yourself one." "But not one like this, dear father. If I say, 'Out of the sack, cudgel,' the cudgel springs out and leads anyone who means ill with me a weary dance, and never stops until he lies on the ground and prays for fair weather. Look, with this cudgel I have got back the wishing table and the gold donkey which the thievish innkeeper took away from my brothers. Now let them both be sent for, and invite all our kinsmen. I will give them food and drink, and will fill their pockets with gold too." The old tailor would not quite believe it, but nevertheless got the relatives together. Then the turner spread a cloth in the room and led in the gold donkey and said to his brother, "Now, dear brother, speak to him." The miller said, "Bricklebrit," and instantly the gold pieces fell down on the cloth like a thunder shower, and the donkey did not stop until every one of them had so much that he could carry no more. Then the turner brought the little table and said, "Now, dear brother, speak to it." And scarcely had the carpenter said, "Table, set yourself," than it was spread and amply covered with the most exquisite dishes. Then such a meal took place as a good tailor had never yet known in his house, and the whole party of kinsmen stayed together till far in the night, and were all merry and glad. The tailor locked away needle and thread, yard measure and flat iron. In a cupboard. Did anyone hear that? Oh gosh, someone's messaging me at work. In a cupboard, and lived with his 3 sons in joy and splendour. What, however, has become of the goat who was to blame for the tailor driving out his sons? You heard it? Yes, Teams. Someone is contacting me out of office hours. Yep. What was I going to say? She was shamed that she had such a bald head and ran to a foxhole and crept into it. When the fox came home, he was met by 2 great eyes shining out of the darkness and was terrified and ran away. Jump scare. A bear met him, and the fox looked quite disturbed and said, "What is the matter with you, brother fox? Why do you look like that?" "Ah," answered Redcoat, "a fierce beast is in my cave and stared at me with its fiery eyes." "We will soon drive him out," said the bear, and went with him to the cave and looked in. But when he saw the fiery eyes, fear seized him likewise, and he would have nothing to do with the furious beast, and took to his heels. The bee met him, and she saw that he was ill at ease, and said, "Bear, are you really making a very pitiful face? What has become of all your—" "What's this? G-A-I-E-T-Y. I've never heard of such a word." "It is all very well for you to talk," replied the bear. "A furious beast with staring eyes is in Redcoat's house, and we can't drive him out." The bee said, "Bear, I pity you. I am a poor weak creature whom you would not turn aside to look at, but still, I believe I can help you." She flew into the fox's cave, lighted on the goat's smoothly shorn head, and stung her so violently that she sprang up, crying, "Meh, meh," and ran forth into the world as if mad, and to this hour no one knows where she has gone. And that was the end of the story. That was a very long one, and very strange again. Okay, do we have time for another story? Yep, I think we do. This one's okay. Rightio. I think this might be the last story. I'm not sure. Let's see. Thumbling. That's the name of the story. There was once a poor peasant who sat in the evening by the hearth and poked the fire, and his wife sat spinning. Then said he, "How sad it is that we have no children. With us all is so quiet, and in other houses it is noisy and lively." "Yes," replied the wife, and sighed. "Even if we had only one, and it was quite small, and only as big as a thumb, I should be quite satisfied, and that we would still love it with all our hearts." Now it so happened that the woman fell ill, and after 7 months gave birth to a child that was perfect in all its limbs, but no longer than a thumb. That must have been the easiest childbirth ever. Then said they, "It is as we wished it to be, and it shall be our dear child," and because of its size they called it Thumbling. They fed it plenty of food, and the child did not grow taller, and remained as it had been at the first. Nevertheless, it looked sensibly out of its size, and soon showed itself to be a wise and nimble creature, for everything it did turned out so well. One day the peasant was getting ready to go into the forest to cut wood, when he said to himself, "How I wish that there was anyone who would bring the cart to me." "Oh, father," cried Thumbling, "I will soon bring the cart, rely on that, and it shall be in the forest at the appointed time." The man smiled and said, "How can that be done? You are far too small to lead the horse by the reins." "That's of no consequence, father. If my mother will only harness it, I shall sit in the horse's ear and call out to him how he is to go." "Well," answered the man, "for once we will try it." When the time came, the mother harnessed the horse and placed Thumbling in its ear, and then the little creature cried, "Huh? Gee up? What's a gee up?" Then it went quite properly as if with its master, and the cart went the right way into the forest. It so happened that just as he was turning a corner, and the little one was crying, "Gee up! What's a gee up?" 2 strange men came towards him. "My word," said one of them, "what is this? There is a cart coming, and the driver is calling to the horse, and he is still not to be seen." "That can't be right," said the other. "We will follow the cart and see where it stops." The cart, however, drove right into the forest and exactly to the place where the wood had been cut. When Thumbling saw his father, he cried to him, "See, father, here I am with the cart. Now take me down." The father got hold of the horse with his left hand, and with his right took his little son out of the ear. Thumbling sat down quite merrily on a straw, but when the 2 strange men saw him, they did not know what to say for astonishment. Then one of them took the other aside and said, "Listen, the little fellow would make our fortune if we exhibited him in a large town for money. We shall buy him." They went to the peasant and said, "Sell us the little man. We shall be well treated with us." "He shall be well treated with us." "No," replied the father, "he is the apple of my eye, and all the money in the world cannot buy him from me." What do you know? Out of all the stories we've read today, this one is actually acting like a dad. Thumbling, however, when he heard of the bargain, had crept up in the folds of his father's coat, placed himself on his shoulder, and whispered in his ear, "Father, do give me away. I will soon come back again." Then the father sold him to the 2 men for a handsome bit of money. "Where will you sit?" they said to him. "Oh, just set me on the rim of your hat, and then I can walk backwards and forwards and look at the country and still not fall down." They did as he wished, and when Thumbling had taken leave of his father, they went away with him. They walked until it was dusk, and then the little fellow said, "Do take me down. I do want to come down." The man took his hat off and put the little fellow on the ground by the wayside, and he leapt and crept about a little between the sods, and then he suddenly slipped into a mouse hole which he had spied. "Good evening, gentlemen. Just go home without me," he cried to them, and mocked them. They ran and stuck their sticks into the mouse hole, but it was all but lost labour. Thumbling crept still farther in, and as soon as it became quite dark, they were forced to go home with their vexation and their empty purses. When Thumbling saw that they were gone, he crept back out of the subterranean passage. "It is so dangerous to walk on the ground in the dark," said he. "How easily a neck or a leg is broken." Fortunately, he knocked against an empty snail shell. "Thank God," said he, "in that I can pass the night in safety," and he got into it. Not long afterwards, just when he was going to sleep, he heard 2 men go by, and one of them was saying, "How shall we contrive to get hold of the rich pastor's silver and gold?" "I could tell you that," cried Thumbling, interrupting them. "What was that?" said one of the thieves in fright. "I heard someone speaking." They stood still, and Thumbling spoke again and said, "Take me with you, and I'll help you." "But where are you?" "Just look on the ground and observe from where my voice comes," he replied. There the thieves at length found him and lifted him up. "You little imp, how will you help us?" they said. "A great deal," said he. "I will creep into the pastor's room through the iron bars and will hand you whatever you want to have." "Come then," they said, "and we will see what you can do." When they got to the pastor's house, Thumbling crept into the room, but instantly cried out with all his might, "Do you want to have everything that's here?" The thieves were alarmed and said, "But do speak softly so as to not waken anyone." Thumbling, however, behaved as if he had not understood this and cried again, "What do you want? Do you want to have everything that is here?" The cook, who slept in the next room, heard this and sat up in bed and listened. The thieves, however, had in their fright run some distance away, but at last they took courage and thought, "That little rascal wants to mock us." They came back and whispered to him, "Come, be serious and reach something out to us." Then Thumbling cried again as loudly as he could, "I really will give you everything, just put your hands in." The maid who was listening heard this quite distinctly, and jumped out of bed and rushed to the door. The thieves took flight, and ran as if the wild huntsmen were behind them. As the maid could not see anything, she went to light a candle. When she came back with it, Thumbling, unperceived, fled to the barn, and the maid, after she had examined every corner and found nothing, lay down in her bed again, and believed that after all she had only been dreaming with open eyes and ears. Thumbling, who climbed up among the hay and found a beautiful place to sleep in, there he intended to rest until day, and then go home again to his parents. But he had other things to go through. Truly, there is much affliction and misery in this world. When day dawned, the maid arose from her bed to feed the cows. Her first walk was into the barn, where she laid hold of an armful of hay, and precisely that very one in which poor Thumbling was lying asleep. He, however, was sleeping so soundly that he was aware of nothing, and did not wake until he was in the mouth of the cow, who had picked him up with the hay. "Ah, heavens!" cried he, "how have I gotten into the mill?" But he soon discovered where he was. Then it was necessary to be careful not to let himself go between the teeth and be dismembered, but he was nevertheless forced to slip down into the stomach with the hay. "In this little room the windows are forgotten," said he, "and no sun shines in, neither will a candle be brought." His quarters were especially unpleasing to him, and the worst was, more and more hay was always coming in by the door, and the space grew less and less. Then at length in his anguish he cried as loud as he could, "Bring me no more fodder! Bring me no more fodder!" The maid was just milking the cow, and she heard someone speaking and saw no one, and perceived that it was the same voice that she heard in the night, and was so terrified that she slipped off her stool and spilled the milk. She ran in great haste to her master and said, "Oh, heavens, pastor, the cow has been speaking." "You are mad," replied the pastor. But he went himself to the barn to see what was there. Hardly, however, he had set his foot inside when Thumbling cried again, "Bring me no more fodder! Bring me no more fodder!" Then the pastor himself was alarmed, and thought that an evil spirit had gone into the cow, and ordered her to be killed. She was killed, but the stomach in which Thumbling was thrown onto the rubbish pile. The rubbish. Thumbling had great difficulty in working his way to the surface. However, he succeeded, and just as he was going to thrust his head out, a new misfortune occurred. A hungry wolf ran over and swallowed the stomach in one gulp. Thumbling did not lose courage. "Perhaps," thought he, "the wolf will listen to what I've got to say." And he called to him from the stomach, "Dear wolf, I know of a magnificent feast for you." "Where is it?" said the wolf. In such a house you must creep into it through the kitchen sink, and will find cakes and bacon and sausages and as much of them as you can eat." And he described to him exactly his father's house. The wolf did not need to be told this twice, squeezed himself in at night through the sink, ate to his heart's content in the larder. When he had his fill, he wanted to go out again, but had become so big that he could not go out the same way. Thumbling had reckoned on this, and now began to make a violent noise in the wolf's body, and rage and screamed as loudly as he could. "Will you be quiet?" said the wolf. "You will wake up the people." "Nonsense," replied the little fellow. "You have eaten your fill, and I will make merry likewise," and began more to scream with all his strength. At last his father and mother were aroused by it, and ran to the room and looked in through the opening in the door. When they saw that a wolf was inside, they ran away, and the husband fetched his axe, and the wife the scythe. "Stay back," said the man when they entered the room. "When I have given him a blow, if he's not killed by it, you must cut him down and hew his body to pieces." Then as Thumbling heard his parents' voices and cried, "Dear father, I am here, I am in the wolf's body," said the father full of joy, "Thank God, our dear child has found us again," and bade the woman take away her scythe, that Thumbling might not be hurt by it. After that he raised his arm and struck the wolf with such a blow on his head that he fell down dead, and then they got knives and scissors and cut his body open and drew the little fellow out. "Ah," said the father, "what sorrow we have gone through for your sake." "Yes, father, I have gone about the world a great deal. Thank heaven I breathe fresh air again." "Where have you been then?" Father, I have been in a mouse's hole, in a cow's stomach, and then in a wolf, and now I will stay with you. And we will not sell you again, no, not for all the riches in the world, said his parents, and they embraced and kissed their dear Thumbling. They gave him food and drink, and had some new clothes made for him, for his own had been spoiled on his journey. Okay, and that was the end. Alright, friends. Thank you so much for being here for today's book reading. I hope you have a lovely rest or a wonderful early morning. And I hope, the day goes well. Okay. Sayonara, everyone.